We know in the last days that the times will be shortened. The frequency of things will speed up. And I believe that relates to the faithful and the falling away as well. Matthew 24, speaking of the last days, says in verse 8, all these are the beginnings of sorrows. And what are all these? Well, nation rise against nation. There will be kingdom against kingdom, famines, pestilences, earthquakes in diverse places. And those are all, of course, examples of what the four horsemen of the apocalypse will bring. And, of course, verse 6 includes the wars, rumors of wars there. And this verse 8, all these are the beginnings of sorrows. That's out of the King James. But if you look at some of the other translations, they reference birth pains. All these are the beginning of birth pains. All these are the beginning of the birth pains. But all this is only the first of the birth pains, with more to come. And this is the translation, and this is the idea that it's looking at, the idea of a woman in labor, where birth pains come and increase in frequency and intensity. They go in waves. It gets hard for a time, and then it lets off, and then it gets hard again, and then it lets off, and that increases the frequency and intensity, right? So we're familiar with that idea, these beginnings of sorrows, and I believe we're in this period right now, the beginnings of sorrows before the four horsemen of the apocalypse ride. It gets worse. Another verse further down, Matthew 24, verse 22, and except those days should be shortened. Again, I'm likening it to the birth pains, where the time is shortening between periods here, and the days will be shortened. It says, except those days should be shortened, there should be no flesh saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. And I believe the Lord is shortening the days here. He is also shortening the reign, if you will, as it relates to believers or the faithful. And he's separating the sheep from the goats, and the wheat from the chaff. And this is just one separation. This is one sifting, the initial one, or maybe there was another one prior to it. But this is one of the examples in what I believe are going to be waves of increasing frequency of these situations that really force believers off the fence into making a decision for Christ, to get more serious about their faith, or simply fall away and say, you know what, this is too much for me. I'm checking out. I'm getting off the bandwagon. I'm going to go my own way. A lot of the young people are turning to Satanism these days. And so God's going to give a lot of opportunity for Christians to really show if they're faithful or not. And this relates to the article that I want to take a look at. This is from Israel365news.com. And it's titled "In U.S. COVID Decreased Prayer Attendance," and that means service attendance, but increased levels of faith. And I think this is really the story of the pandemic. It was used by God, although God doesn't bring evil upon the world or upon us, but he certainly used the pandemic to really separate, again, the true Christians, the true faithful, from those adherents, from those Sunday-going Christians. Attendance at churches and synagogues has not returned to pre-pandemic levels, but for many, the COVID experience strengthened their faith, with many seeing it as a message from God. And I believe it basically was that. It was basically a warning to the Christians saying, times are going to get hard. You're going to have to really have a lot of faith. You're going to have to put a lot of faith in me to provide for you. And here's just an example of it. And a lot of people took that opportunity during the pandemic to say, you know what, church is canceled. It's back on again. But you know what, I've been away for 6 months, a year. I haven't been attending because of the pandemic, and I'm just not going to go back. And a lot of people have just not went back to church. I believe a lot of those people are the Sunday Christians, those whose faith was weak, and God again is separating them. He's ensuring that those who are faithful are with him, and everybody else who calls themselves faithful but are not are being they're being pushed off the fence effectively by God, so that when the day of wrath comes, and this is the whole purpose of it, when the day of wrath comes, nobody will have an excuse. No one will say, wait a minute, I was a Christian, I went to church. He will give you so many opportunities, and he's going to make it harder and harder for people to just simply say they're Christians. And times will get tough for the Christians to the point where it will really test your faith. Remember, Matthew says, except those days be shortened, there shall be no flesh saved. Because the testing, not only because the wars, rumors of wars, but the testing that the Christians go through, for the elect's sake, he is shortening them because the pressure is going to be so much, and it's going to be hard to take. It's going to be hard to continue and keep the faith. The report concluded that religious identity remained stable through the pandemic, but religious attendance was significantly lower in spring 2022 than it was pre-pandemic. Rather than completely upending established patterns, the pandemic accelerated ongoing trends in religious change. The pandemic effectively gave people permission to leave their faith, people permission to stop going to church on Sunday when what they really want to do is sleep in or go to the beach or do whatever. That's what most people on Sunday want to do. You know what? Hands up for most people, because the flesh wants to do these things. The flesh doesn't want to get up necessarily and serve God and honor God. But ultimately, we need to fight against that flesh and honor our Creator and God and our Savior by doing things like gathering together as believers and worship and praising Him. And again, most people would rather just stay in bed and just take it easy on Sunday. And this is exactly what the pandemic caused. A lot of people chose that. So long story short, it was the pandemic was a separation. I believe it was used by God, and God knew this was coming, and He used it in a lot of really good ways. And we could talk about church buildings, all the money that goes into church buildings that were not used for 2 years straight, basically, and maybe we should be putting our money into missions and that sorts of things, and the spreading of the gospel rather than having it in bank accounts. But again, the biggest thing that I think that happened through it was the separation, this testing, this proving of who is for God and who is against, and who is just kind of a lukewarm Christian. And there will be more pain to come, and it's going to be really hard as a Christian to keep your faith. But these are to make you a stronger Christian, to make you grow deeper in relationship with Him, so much so that it'll get so desperate where we are praying daily for God's providing. We are praying daily for God's safety. What do they do in the third world? What do they do where they don't have money and they have nothing but to rely and to have faith in God for their sustenance? They have a great and incredible faith in Jesus, because that is their only hope. Without Him, they will die, potentially. We in the Western world, we live fat, dumb, and happy. We've got everything. I don't need God. I can use my bank card and go to the grocery store and buy all the food I want, more than I want. I don't need to ask God for anything. And that's the way it is with most Westerners. And so we rely less on God and more on ourselves, and more on the money from the government, and more on the possessions that we have. When the government takes it all away, when World War III takes it all away, when famine, the four horsemen of the apocalypse ride, take that all away, what are you left with? Most people will be left with nothing, and they will be desperate. But the Christians, the faithful, will rely on God, and God will provide. And so you need a strong faith to deal with that and the pressure that's going to be on Christians in the last days. Thanks for watching, folks. I'll leave it there. We'll see you in the next video.